you would please open up your Bibles to Hebrews chapter 5. We'll be starting in verse 11 and reading through the end of the chapter. Hebrews chapter 5, starting in verse 11. We have a great deal to say about this, and it is difficult to explain since you have become too lazy to understand. Although by this time you ought to be teachers, you need someone to teach you the basic principles of God's revelation again. You need milk, not solid food. Now everyone who lives on milk is inexperienced with the message about righteousness because he is an infant. But solid food is for the mature, for those whose senses have been trained to distinguish between good and evil.
Good morning. I'll let you read the last of that while I clear up the process up here. I've been probably annoying with how, fixated, how thoroughly and consistently I've been enjoying the natural world around us lately. Stoked about the rain that we got last night, the bits of thunder that we got. Maybe that's just because it didn't do any damage where I'm at. But even when it does, I'm happy. Happy when the ground gets moisture. I'm happy with fun, abnormal weather events, I guess. In fact, I liked it so much that I went ahead and left both of my windows down last night in my car in the driveway. So that was really cool to wake up to this morning. And if you wanted like an indicator of about how I've been doing lately, that sums it up. So with that said, keep an extra close watch on the teaching this morning. I have plans. We'll see where things go. No, in seriousness, what I actually wanted to bring out was to direct you to Psalm 29 for your own sake. I won't read that this morning, but Psalm 30 right after that has this beautiful concept that's not foreign to us, of course, but Psalm 30 and we'll read verses 4 and 5. It says, "Sing praises to the Lord, O you his saints, and give thanks to his holy name. For his anger is but for a moment, and his favor is for a lifetime. Weeping may tarry for the night, but joy comes in the morning." That's definitely a thought. Going to bed the way that we all went to bed last night with the weather doing what it was doing, and then waking up this morning, just the most serene, beautiful, sunny morning is just gorgeous. And what a parable of God's delight in us and the joy that we have in him. I'm thinking of the end of Malachi chapters 3 and 4, and like the calf going out leaping from the stall, the morning sun rising with healing in its wings, just all this wonderful things. In fact, it's hard to get in your car with the seats wet and then want to roll the windows up. It's like, well, I'm not going to roll them up now. No, it feels good outside. Anyway, pray for my car. This morning, what we're actually mostly here to discuss is the elder qualifications. We've kind of reached a milestone, and we're reaching another milestone this morning. The first one is that we're done with all of the ones in Titus. We've been using the list in Titus chapter 1 as kind of the basis as we're going through. We've been kind of anchored in Titus instead of Timothy. Well, now we're done with the ones in Titus, and we just have two more that come up at the end of that particular section in 1 Timothy chapter 3. And so these are the two that we're looking at. They're in verses 6 and 7. This is kind of an interesting way to end. If we were studying 1 Timothy, I might have more to say about the literary structure, what's going on here, but that's not where we're focused this morning. But he says that, talking about, of course, the qualified elder, he must not be a recent convert. So we'll talk about that this morning. Or he may become puffed up with conceit and fall into the condemnation of the devil. Moreover, he must be well thought of by outsiders, so that he may not fall into disgrace, into a snare of the devil. Interesting couple of things to try and blend. There's a natural combination, right? Because the devil comes up in both of these. The idea that a transgression in each of these qualifications leads to the condemnation of the devil, the snare of the devil. We'll unpack that a little bit this morning. I'll just tell you it pretty much just means what it says. But we'll find that out as we go. So with that, so the consequence of being unqualified or failing in these qualifications is really similar and has the strong overlap and the strong combination. But what do these qualifications have to do with one another, if anything? Are they ideologically linked at all? And I don't know, maybe I'm forcing the connection so that we can have a one-word kind of subtitle the way we've been doing it. But the first one is that he must not be a recent convert, or as we're familiar with, not a novice, right? Lest he become puffed up with conceit and fall into the condemnation of the devil. And the other one is that he must be well thought of by outsiders. Conceit is thinking too highly of yourself, right? And the other one is about outsiders not thinking highly enough of you, if you want to reduce it to that. And so the way that I'm titling it this morning is about being above reproach in esteem, how you esteem yourself and how you are esteemed by others. That's kind of how we'll take these this morning. So with that, our first one is not a recent convert. This one, the qualification itself doesn't have to do with the esteem. The consequence of being unqualified is where the self-esteem comes into play, right? Because if we appoint a novice, he might become puffed up. So we're going to follow our pattern of how we've been studying these things, which is, as I coined recently, the AMTAP method, right? It's everybody's favorite phrase now, which is as many translations as possible. That's been our study technique, since we're not Greek scholars, or most of us are not Greek speakers in any sense. We can rely heavily on the scholars who do know the original languages and have put those together for us by looking at the majority of those, or as many as you can get your hands on, and with free tools like blueletterbible.com, you can. That's where I've gotten all of these. These are all on for free on Blue Letter Bible. So you can look at you can cross-reference all of these translations there pretty easily. So English Standard Version is what I'm using, and that's our basis, and that has, as we saw, not a recent convert, which is common with others. Most have, or many more have, not a new convert. We're familiar with not a novice, not a new believer, is what the NLT has, and the Bible for Basic English, or Bible in Basic English, I don't remember how they word it, says not one newly taken into the church. Which maybe doesn't change what you were thinking about already. Maybe it does, but it's just kind of a simpler way to express that. Sometimes that's helpful, right? So by looking at all of these things, you can get a pretty well-rounded idea of what's going on here. What is this qualification really about? We want to appoint somebody. We must appoint somebody who is not a recent convert. And so, or not a novice. And since we're familiar with that language, or that's what's stuck in my head when we talk about this one, what constitutes a novice? There's some pretty intuitive delineations in terms of some things you would say are obvious. Somebody who was born again yesterday, very obviously a novice, right? Somebody who's been a Christian for 20, 25 years, probably slow to call that person a novice. You'd probably be hard-pressed to get somebody who knows that fact and still says, yeah, no, that's a novice Christian right there. So where in between there, right? What about somebody who's been a Christian for 2 years, or for 10, or for 15, right? So there's, as has been acknowledged with many of these, there are, as David likes to put it, there are qualitative qualifications, right? Which means that there's we have to determine the quality. It's not quantitative, which is just either it is this or it isn't that, or there's a set number or a well-defined term. Qualitative is the idea of it's somewhat subjective. You have to figure out this quality kind of for yourself or through wisdom in seeking that. But you have to apply thought, and you have to maybe come to consensus about what constitutes a novice. And so some things I would suggest would be maybe helpful to think about is, first of all, asking a question like, if somebody learned that you were considering this man for an elder, would someone be surprised at the time between their conversion and their potential appointment as an elder? If somebody says, yeah, you know what, we really like this guy. He's only been a Christian for 3 years, or if you have to say it like that, maybe that's an indicator. But, we really like this guy. Would somebody scratch their heads at that? Probably. I need to throw in a caveat here. And maybe you're aware of this, or you've thought about this, or had this pointed out. Maybe you haven't, so I'll just put it out there. When Timothy and Titus are sent out, and their part of their job seems to be to appoint elders. With Titus, it's explicit. For this reason, I left you in Crete, that you had set in order what remains and appoint elders. Right? That's his job. These are what we would consider newish congregations, full of a bunch of newish converts. When you look at Paul's missionary journeys and the appointment of elders along his path, when you do the math, you have some young churches. You have some 2, 3, 4-year-old Christians sometimes, definitely around or under the 10-year mark. And they're able to appoint elders in those places. So sometimes what we mean and what the Bible means is different. And one of the factors there, in a way that I've had this put, it points out that time alone is not what matures a Christian. The passage of time alone is not what matures a Christian. Somebody was talking about how they did, I think it was employee evaluations or something like that. I don't know. They were talking about the question of experience, the experience that they had in the role that they were filling. And somebody had been in that position for 10 years, but it was put that they didn't so much have 10 years of experience as much as they had 1 year of experience 10 times, back to back. In other words, they were in the role, but they weren't growing in the role, right? Have you ever maybe you felt this way for yourself, that you've been a Christian for however long, but you don't necessarily feel like that old of a Christian? Maybe you know somebody who's been a Christian for years, but you don't see the fruits of maturity being brought out in their lives. And some people are very, very quick on the take and able to be very mature in the faith fairly quickly. So again, one of the things that we have to do with all of these, since we're talking about appointing elders as shepherds in the flock, the spiritual, and tending the spiritual body of Christ, we have to use spiritual terms and ideas and standards, sacrificing deliberately our earthly ones. This is another one where we might challenge kind of some things that we would expect to see. With that, we do expect that there should be maturity, right? It was pointed out, and this was our scripture reading from Hebrews chapter 5, by this time you ought to be teachers. So there's an expectation of growth and maturity among Christians, right? That's what we're supposed to be doing. And I would suggest to you that this, more than anything, the actual maturing and growth of a Christian is what matters most when we talk about somebody being not a novice. One of the reasons that they might have had advantages in the first century church is that a great deal of the converts were Jews first. And they had a really solid footing on which to be brought into the New Testament. It came with its challenges, didn't it? A lot of the New Testament is about the challenges of coping with previously having been Jewish, right? But they had a leg up when it comes to spiritual maturity and being able to express and continue God's plan and His will in the lives of His people. you have different growth rates, but there still better never be an expectation that anything like a brand new Christian, right, is suddenly not a novice, right? So there's balance and wisdom that has to be applied, and we have to talk about this. As I'm looking forward to the class on this next week to discuss, like, what does this look like? Where do we find the line between what's too little time, no matter how quick they are on the take, versus how quick on the take can somebody be, or how wise and mature is somebody that coming into the faith recently maybe was very a natural progression. Things like that should be considered. Let's see. There's a note that, as I mentioned in class, came from class that I don't want to forget. So I'll put it here. The Bible in Basic English Translation, remember it had the language of not newly taken into the church. This is the closest qualification that I'm aware of from which we can make any kind of inference towards what I think is intuitive and has been stated here locally. Is while we're talking in general about a novice being new to the faith in general, capital F, right, or the church, capital C, the church in the universal sense, it's also probably unwise to appoint somebody who's newly taken into the local flock, right, who's not terribly new to the local church. I don't think you can get that directly out of the Greek, okay? I don't think you can get that directly even from the text, but I think it's true, and if it goes anywhere, it kind of goes here. So I'll shoehorn it in with the explicit declaration that I'm shoehorning something in, okay? But I think not being new to the local flock is important for a man being qualified and able to do the job, right? Which might have some bearing on when do we call somebody no longer new, right? The right answer, right, is when somebody newer comes along, right? But, or something more serious than that. But remember that the reason for this command, the reason that this matters, that they're not a novice, is supplied directly in the text. And here the reason for this one is the gateway to pride. And that is the gateway, if you will, to the condemnation of the devil. And this is put a few different ways. I'm not going to miss the fact that we're emphasizing pride the last day of May before it becomes June. And just the reminder to anybody who forgets what the Bible says about pride. It doesn't ever talk about pride in a good way. I think I've said that before. I've maybe made too much of that in the past. But it is true. The Bible doesn't have anything good to say about pride. It's certainly never encouraged as one of our attributes. Here, it's a reason that an elder can come to ruin is because of his own pride. Okay. There's some question about kind of the phrasing or what do we mean by falling into the condemnation of the devil. Some translations read it a little strangely. So when you're following the AMTAP method, you find some and I'm not putting these on the screen, but the New Living Translation or NLT has the devil would cause him to fall. So puffed up with pride or something similar to that. But and the devil would cause him to fall is the language. We also have the NET, New English Translation, has they would fall into the punishment that the devil will exact. I don't know. Sometimes you find a phrase like that, and a helpful question to ask is, does it change anything whether the devil is the one condemning you or something like that, or the devil being the one to punish you, versus falling into the same condemnation that the devil is subject to, which is the other reading on this? It doesn't change anything, right? We're talking about spiritual destruction and condemnation, right? Things to stay away from, right? So whichever one, both should be equally terrifying, and that's the point. The idea here, I don't know if I have to spell this out, but we're in the business of spelling things out because we're going through these qualifications deliberately, is that a novice who's appointed to the position of an elder that can go to his head. Yes, I'm just brand new at this, but they think that I'm better than all of them, and see, they've appointed me and given me this fancy rod. Right, the hyperbole, but that's the path. We talked even just last week, I think, about power corrupts and that whole concept. It's especially corruptive, you might say, on people who are not prepared to take it on, right? And so we should not put this stumbling block before a brother, regardless of how stellar how mature for their age they seem. That can still be a stumbling block for them, and they can succumb to pride and ultimately to condemnation. I want to make it clear that that's not just a matter of an end result that happens behind the scenes and disconnected from the effects on the congregation. We probably know all too well the effects of arrogance in church leadership, and that it is not pleasant to be under, right, if I'm putting it lightly. And so this is something that has daily, week after week, month after month, year after year, compounding effects on the spiritual health of the congregation. So we have to keep that in that context and again, take this very seriously. There's also just the very simple truth that you should not let infants be shepherds. We have this language in Scripture kind of throughout of this idea of spiritual infancy. In 1 Peter 2, for example, it starts by instructing us to, like newborn babes, long for the pure milk of the word, so that you may grow thereby. There's a whole host of language around that. You're supposed to be an infant when you start, right? You are an infant when you start. You start that way. And then you grow from there, and you're expected to grow from there. It's possible to not grow from there spiritually, and that's bad, and we can't let that happen. But generally, when we're talking about this, we do not appoint infants as shepherds. That would be completely inappropriate. We just, in general, should not be putting underqualified, undermatured people in a position where we're expecting them to be a weight-bearing pillar of the church or the church's mission in the world in any way. The idea that we're putting that, we shouldn't, I don't know if we are, I don't think we are. We shouldn't be putting that weight on our children and expecting that from them. So spiritually, when we're talking about elders and the maturity of elders, we have to express the similar wisdom and consideration for them and for the flock that they'll be leading. I don't think there's too much more I can do on this one. This one's pretty straightforward, right? We're not appointing spiritual infants or newborns to be our spiritual shepherds. It will lead to, among other problems, pride and the condemnation of the devil. So with that, the last qualification that we're talking about before we look at other aspects of the appointment for our remaining class periods and sermons this month is being well thought of by outsiders. Again, using our AMTAP method, I didn't break out all the tiny little nuance of whether somebody said good report or good testimony or good reputation or well thought of, because those all mean the same thing, versus those outside the church, outsiders, again, all just variations that are different through the translations, but it's very tedious to pick apart. It's easy to scan the list and see that they're all basically saying the same thing. Here are three that kind of vary. Hopefully it's not too confusing how I put the break on the New English translation. Using the English Standard Version's same language of well thought of, and it specifies those outside the faith. That's not a tremendous variation. But these other two say that the people outside the church must speak well of him, New Living Translation. BBE again, have a good name among those outside the church. I liked the kind of, I don't know, flavor, if you want to say, of those additional concepts, if you will. When we talk about this, and let me sort this out here. Yeah, I didn't think so. Like we mentioned in class, we have to take grains of salt, right, with these concepts. Somebody has to be well thought of by outsiders. That means that no unbeliever can have beef with somebody that we want to appoint as an elder. Not necessarily, right? Did outsiders maybe ever have beef with Peter? Yeah, I imagine they did. We don't think Paul was an elder, right? He was unmarried according to 1 Corinthians 7, or at least unmarried at that time. Generally, otherwise, we might think of him being somebody who essentially could have been an elder, but did people have beef with him? Yes, absolutely, constantly. Like that drove his itinerary, right, for a lot of his journeys. But that's not why he wouldn't have been qualified to be an elder, right? So when we talk about having to consider the opinions of outsiders on a potential elder, we expect that a Christian's reputation is going to frequently be mocked, ridiculed, slandered, reviled, all these things, right? We have passages warning us and assuring us that this is going to be the fact. What we expect is that they're going to be above reproach and still being mocked, reviled, slandered, etc. 1 Peter 2:23 is one of the several clear places pointing to Jesus' example as the one to follow when we are suffering. When Jesus was reviled, he did not revile in return. Wait, what was there to revile about Jesus? If he had a bad opinion among outsiders, is he qualified to be the good shepherd? Absolutely, because those people's opinions were wrong. Right? That'll happen sometimes, and that's not what we're being sensitive to. Matthew 5:10-12, again, we know this stuff pretty well. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when others revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account, keyword being falsely. Shouldn't have taken that long, but rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven, for so they persecuted the prophets who were before you. All of this to just say again, the basic principle is that it would be foolish to believe every complaint from a worldly person. I need to know that your neighbors, your coworkers, your employers, your employees speak well of you. When they don't, I need to know why they don't. Right? See, serious or legitimate complaints that they have against you need to be investigated. We need to search that out. That has to be examined. But if they don't like you because you're too generous, you're too compassionate, you're too kind, or you're annoying because, and ultimately it comes down to they think you have a problem with them, or something petty, right? Or just they're irked by Christianity and the fact that you're a Christian, or some other thing. There's plenty of ridiculous people, plenty of ridiculous reasons that ridiculous people get offended by other people, right? We've got to be able to sort through that. So we also shouldn't be like afraid when we come to this qualification and say, well, look, there's this guy that doesn't like me at all. Like, he hates my guts. I don't know if I should desire the office or be considered because they're going to find out that this guy, or maybe I don't let him talk. No, it's fine. If you're above reproach, right? Above reproached does not mean never reproached. It means you're above it. Okay. I have 1 Timothy 5:22 because we're also going to talk about the reason for this instruction, right? Was so that, let me turn back over there and not misquote. This is 1 Timothy 3:7. He must be well thought of by outsiders so that he may not fall into disgrace, into a snare of the devil. I want us to remember that in 1 Timothy 5:22, and it's my conviction. I think it's provable. I'm not about proving it this morning. I think this has a lot to do with the appointment of elders. When he says not to lay hands, not be hasty in the laying on of hands or take part in the sins of others, keep yourself pure. I think this has to do with Timothy's role in appointing elders, not to do it hastily, because you participate in their sin when you do that. You're taking part in the sins of others, and you're supposed to keep yourself pure. And the reason for the command is that they might fall into disgrace and the snare of the devil if they're not well thought of by outsiders. There's probably a few different ways that you can get from A to B on this one. I think the most straightforward is the fact that if you have skeletons in your closet that your neighbor knows about and your brethren don't, and that's drug out to light at some inopportune time, that can have devastating effects on your reputation among the flock. Now, maybe your reputation isn't what we're mostly concerned about in a situation like that. Maybe we're concerned with the deception and the years and the facade and whether we can trust somebody or not, and whether they're honest and can be trusted as a leader. All of those things are rightly in question. But the thing pointed to in the text specifically is disgrace, and that leading to the snare of the devil. Now, this is another opportunity to break this one down and look at how different translations talk about this and understand this. But again, I think this is really straightforward. The idea that in your disgrace, in you being brought to shame because of your sin that your neighbor, your employer, your employee, coworker, whatever, knew about and brings up and brings to light that the church didn't know, especially if you've already been appointed when that comes to light or when that bomb is dropped, whatever happens. There's disgrace there. There's shame. And that shame, what he's saying here, is a snare of the devil, which is kind of interesting language. And what I think is interesting here is that the disgrace is an opportunity for the devil. It doesn't mean that the devil inherently already has you. Now, there's degrees to which that may already be true, and if we're concealing sin and not dealing with sin, maybe that is true. We're not here to discuss all the theological nuances of salvation and soteriology that's wrapped up in that. But what I do want you to remember always, brothers and sisters, not only as we look at appointing elders, but as we look at maturing and being, qualified Christians, worthy of wearing the name. You need to remember that Satan, the devil, our adversary, is the accuser. And one of his greatest weapons in your life, and you know this already, is your shame. That is one of his biggest doors of opportunity into your heart and against your soul. He loves to get between your ears and tell you that you don't deserve your salvation, you don't deserve to have authority or sway or a relationship that people look to you at all because of that thing you did. And brethren, this is all about being above reproach. And what's terrible about Satan's lies is that they're so connected to some truth. Like, we're supposed to be above reproach. But we have to remember, both as sheep and potential shepherds, that the shame of sin can be handled correctly or incorrectly. It is not the end of the game. Don't let it be the end of the game. Your disgrace, your shame, is an opportunity for Satan to catch you. Does not have to be. But as we, again, think about this instruction, we want to prevent that stumbling block from coming into a brother's path. So we check, right? this is why we do our due diligence and do our homework and see how somebody is thought of by outsiders and what's coming down the pipeline. What is somebody lying in wait to spring to ruin this person's life because they've been rivals for years, whether the brother probably didn't even know it, but had long-standing resentment growing on the other half of a relationship. It happens. To blow things up. We should be strong enough and wise enough to recognize it and overcome, but we should also be thorough enough to keep that disgrace, that reproach out of and away from the church, and keep the church pure and spotless and unleavened. There's a both and thing going on here. Similar to the not a novice thing, right? Where we have to weigh the passage of time and the actual maturity and balance that. We have to know that we're appointing men who have sinned to the office of elders and expecting them to still count as being above reproach somehow. We've got to hold that in balance and use love and wisdom when we make these decisions. We also have to accept God's love and God's wisdom when he says that the shame of our sin is able to be overcome. And in fact, that Jesus took that shame upon him. Galatians emphasizes that Jesus, in addition to the host, the myriads, the thousands, it seems, of prophecies, hundreds at least, of prophecies that Jesus fulfilled, one of them was the curse of being hung on a tree, and that he took on that shame. Philippians 2, as we know very well, emphasizes that he took on not only the humiliating form of a man when you're rightfully God, but not even one of the great, highly esteemed men, but a servant, and became obedient to the point of death, even the death of a heinous, hated criminal for us. So we can revel in his grace and be grateful for that, and we can show that gratitude by walking with him faithfully. And if we can help you with that in any way, whether starting your walk with him or taking the next step after a misstep, we want to help you if there's ways we can. Let us know by coming forward as we stand and sing.